2018 season that saw some promise and a playoff berth, a lot of things went wrong for Mitch Trubisky in 2019 to say the least. While the expectations were for Trubisky to take that next step forward as a franchise quarterback, instead, last season was nothing short of a disaster. Starting in Week 1 at home against the Green Bay Packers, the Bears' offense was absolutely dreadful. Matt Nagy's 202 version of the offense quickly devolved into a bottom 5 unit with a run game that couldn't get going, poor tight end play, and a questionable offensive line. At the center of it all was Trubisky, whose numbers across the board saw a significant drop from around league average to the bottom of the league ranks. What caused him to fall on his face in 2019? Was it Nagy's play calling, the offensive line, or was Trubisky the one mostly at fault? These were the main questions I was looking to answer, and to do that, I went back to the film. For my film study, I took a look at all of Trubisky's tape over the past 2 seasons to determine some of the issues that plagued him and the offense. While there were certainly issues across the board, at the core of the problems was Trubisky. More specifically, the one trend that has consistently dragged him down over the past 2 seasons, especially throughout last year, has been his tendency to leave plays on the field. I track these plays using 2 methods: missed reads and inaccurate throws. These were used to have an approximate for the number of completions, yards, touchdowns, and first downs that could have been had with basic execution. This was then calculated into what I dubbed as missed opportunity percentage. Missed opportunity percentage is the total amount of tracked first downs and touchdowns left on the field divided by the number of dropbacks. According to my tracking data in 2019, Trubisky left 68 completions for 1,180 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 47 first downs left on the field, or a total of 56 total missed opportunities. Taking that all into account, Trubisky had a 9.72 missed opportunity rate. While Trubisky's statistics indicate that he played better in 2018 if you were to look at his Pro Football Reference page, the tape told a different story that leads me to the view that what we saw out of him last season really shouldn't have come as a surprise. Despite 82 more dropbacks in 2019, Trubisky was worse across the board in terms of leaving plays on the field. Most notably, Trubisky left nearly double the amount of touchdowns that were available to him when comparing 2018 and 2019. This trend remains consistent when adjusting for net losses in each year, albeit the difference is less noticeable. Net loss takes into account the stats made up for either on the play in question or following plays on that particular series. This slight difference in net loss from year to year suggests that the difference between Trubisky's individual performance was minimal at most between both years. It was evident to me both when it comes to the data and the film that the Bears in 2018 just did a much better job at covering up Trubisky's mistakes. When analyzing his flaws, I'm going to start with the easiest one to identify, which is accuracy. For the second season in a row, Trubisky had a very difficult time connecting on throws down the field. According to Next Gen Stats, he completed 38% of his throws 20 or more yards down the field in 2018 and 34% in 2019. Over the course of the season, Matt Nagy drew up many shot plays to strike down the field, but rarely was Trubisky able to capitalize on them. One of the most notable examples of this came in Week 16 versus the Kansas City Chiefs. In the second quarter, with the Bears down 10-0, the Bears called a play-action, moving pocket concept meant to isolate Allen Robinson in a one-on-one matchup. Javon Wims and Anthony Miller are running clear-out routes to open up the left side of the field and stretch the defense vertically to create a big throwing window. Robinson is running an across-the-field wheel route and sells it nicely to get wide open. Despite having a clean pocket and all day to throw, however, Trubisky still overthrows him, and the Bears would eventually go scoreless for this half. If Trubisky is going to bounce back in 2020 and even come close to reaching his ceiling, he needs to become a much more efficient and accurate deep ball passer. defenses were able to take advantage of the fact that Trubisky wasn't capable of beating them with his deep ball last season, and that aspect limited what the Bears were capable of accomplishing on offense. Accuracy concerns are not as big of an issue when compared to the mental side of the game for Trubisky, which boils down to a combination of pre-snap identification, slow processing ability, and post-snap decision-making. Trubisky has been criticized quite a bit for locking onto his first reads over the course of his career. The most glaring example of this came in Week 3 versus Washington. On their first possession of the second half on a 3rd and long, the Bears came out in a 3-by-1 wide receiver set in 11 personnel with Miller as the inside slot receiver. Having 3 cornerbacks lined up in press on the wide receiver side, along with a lone safety playing deep, should signal to Trubisky that Washington's playing a cover 1 man coverage with a potential blitz as Washington is showing pressure. Nagy has the perfect play call for this defense with a rub concept meant to free up Miller on a wheel route. All Trubisky has to do is look off the safety to make sure he isn't cheating to that side of the field, set his feet at the top of his drop, and make the throw. Instead, for some inexplicable reason, Trubisky doesn't even look in that direction and immediately throws the check down to Trey Burton. We see him here before the snap identify the blitz and communicate that to the offensive line, but he completely overreacts to it upon the snap and doesn't give the play a chance. This ended up not mattering in the grand scheme of things for this game in isolation. But when these type of mistakes pile on top of each other over the course of a season, it can be no surprise that the offense will leave a lot to be desired as a result. Pre-snap identification is only a precursor of Trubisky's main flaw, which is post-snap processing and decision-making. Trubisky is either way too slow to get off his initial reads to move on in the progression, or is too quick to move off of receivers that are just getting open down the field. There simply isn't enough anticipation in his game right now, and Trubisky certainly isn't using the full field to his advantage on a consistent basis. I also noticed as the year wore on that there was a tendency of him being too quick to leave the pocket or have his eyes focus on the pass rush when there was any hints of pressure. One play where this all comes to a head is in Week 17 versus the Minnesota Vikings. The Bears have an outbreaking levels concept at the bottom of the screen with a backside post here. Both corners are in outside leverage pre-snap, which should already signal to Trubisky that this play might not work and he should prepare to move on to his third option, which is either Miller underneath or Ridley on the post. As the play starts, we see all of the attention go to the right side of the field, leaving the middle wide open for Ridley. Instead of progressing to his third read to hit Ridley for the touchdown, Trubisky instead opts to roll out to the right despite there being no pressure whatsoever. The Bears had to settle for a field goal on this drive when they, once again, should have put 7 on the board. All of these issues seen throughout the year culminated into Week 15 versus the Packers. That game at Lambeau Field was the ultimate Mitch Trubisky experience. Trubisky had some really high-level throws that teased Bears fans with the tantalizing talent that propelled him to be the high pick that he was in the 2017 NFL Draft. Of course, Trubisky made up for that by leaving an abundance of opportunities on the field throughout the game. According to my tracking data, Trubisky left 11 completions for 162 yards and 9 first downs. Whether it be by throwing inaccurate balls, taking unnecessary sacks, or throwing interceptions when he had a receiver open, these mistakes killed the Bears' offense throughout the game as they struggled to put together scoring drives. Trubisky struggled reading one concept in particular, the dagger concept. This play is effective against cover 3 and cover 4 zones, especially in second and third and long situations. The dagger concept involves the inside receiver on a particular side of the field running a clear-out route to take the safety out of a play, which opens up room for the outside receiver on a deep dig route at or beyond the sticks to be in a throwing window in front of the safeties and behind the linebackers. The Packers had a tendency to run this cover 3 or cover 4 coverage on third and longs last season, and Nagy must have noticed this when putting together the game plan, as he called dagger concepts 5 times according to my count. Unfortunately, the Bears were only able to convert this once, despite the actual route combination working each time. With all of these missed opportunities, the Bears ended up only scoring 13 points in a decisive loss that effectively ended their playoff hopes. If there's anything for me to take away from this exercise, it should be noted that Trubisky did not regress in 2019. Rather, his supporting cast regressed to reveal the glaring flaws within his game. Circling back to the questions I posed at the beginning, it would be dishonest of me not to point out the other obvious issues plaguing the Bears' 2019 offense. The offensive line undoubtedly took a giant step back this past season, with health and continuity being the main culprit. This was especially the case on the right side of the offensive line, where Bobby Massey missed about half the season, and if we're really being honest here, he wasn't very good when healthy anyway. The right guard spot was also a complete disaster, as Kyle Long was a shell of his former self when healthy, and his eventual replacement, Rashad Coward, may have quite possibly been the worst guard in football. Switching Cody Whitehair and James Daniel at center and left guard respectively was also in hindsight a bit of a lackluster move to say the least. Throughout the first half of the year, the Bears' offensive line struggled mightily at handling blitzes and stunts, which led to way too many breakdowns in their pass protection. Whether Daniels or Trubisky was ultimately at fault here, I can't really say, but it isn't a coincidence that these issues were cleaned up and Trubisky had his two best games of the season versus the Lions on Thanksgiving and the Cowboys in primetime, following the switch back to Whitehair at center. Drops were also certainly more prevalent this past season, and something that I've seen many fans in support of Trubisky point out adamantly when defending him. It is certainly a fact. The Bears receivers were more prone to drops in 2019, with an increasing rate of 2.6% in 2018 to 5.5% this past season, according to Pro Football Reference. That rate was a bit above the league average of 4.8%, but still just 12th highest in the NFL. With that said, the drops issue is a little bit overstated to me, as Trubisky ranked 24th in expected points added lost via drops in 2019 and was one of the quarterbacks least impacted in terms of drops when it comes to that EPA statistics in general, according to Anthony Reinhardt. All this is to say is that even if the Bears receivers were better with drops this past season, Trubisky and the offense was still ranked near the bottom of the league in production regardless. Finally, the big debate ever since that fateful Thursday night game on Week 1 for the Bears fan base has been the question of who's to blame, Nagy's play calling or Trubisky. Now, Nagy certainly is far from perfect as a play caller, with tendencies to get way too cute at times, as well as get away from the run game throughout the course and flow of the game. The inability to put together a quality, efficient run game in general has definitely been a sore spot for him during his tenure as head coach. With that said, I think it's a bit far-fetched to say that Nagy is the main culprit here when it comes to the Bears' offensive woes, especially considering how effective his passing scheme has been at getting receivers open. There is most definitely potential here, and we've seen flashes of it throughout his tenure. The Bears should have easily had a top 10 passing offense in 2018 with just average quarterback play. And while there were definitely problems in 2019 besides Trubisky for sure that Nagy is accountable for, the unit independent of quarterback play isn't the basement dweller that the statistical rankings would suggest. This is probably the main reason why the Bears were aggressive in requiring Nick Foles early in the offseason. For one, Foles has spent the better part of the last 5 seasons in the Andy Reid coaching tree and has proven success within this offense, of course, winning Super Bowl MVP as a member of the Philadelphia Eagles following the 2017 season. In many ways, he's the complete opposite of Trubisky. Whereas Trubisky possesses excellent arm talent to make all the necessary throws and the athleticism to make plays with his feet, Foles is a traditional pocket passer who relies on his brain rather than his physical attributes. While Trubisky struggles with diagnosing defenses, processing, and pocket presence, Foles is a seasoned veteran who can break down what defenses are doing pre- and post-snap and is not afraid to stand tall in the pocket to make plays. Additionally, Foles has flashed above-average deep ball accuracy and is more than willing to give his guys a chance to make a play if presented the option. Now, is Nick Foles a complete upgrade over Trubisky at this point? The answer to that would probably be a mixture of yes and no. Foles certainly has his limitations that are well documented, and there's a reason he has been a career backup. I do think Foles gives the Bears a higher floor on offense, however, given his experience. With a roster that is built to be more defensive-minded, having that higher floor on a more consistent basis could be more appealing to Nagy than Trubisky's somewhat erratic week-to-week play. Now, while I've been critical of Trubisky here, it should be noted that I hope these issues have been fixed over the offseason, and I'm rooting for Trubisky to have a more successful year in 2020. Trubisky clearly has the talent to be a solid starting quarterback, but the mental side of the game is holding him back at this stage. The Bears must get better quarterback play in 2020 if they're going to capitalize on a Super Bowl caliber defense, whether that comes from Foles or Trubisky. But the best path going forward for the team long term is for Trubisky to put it all together here and now so as to avoid quarterback purgatory. With the Bears currently in the midst of training camp, the pressure is on for Trubisky to put it together with his future status in the NFL on the line. We have about a month left until the 2020 season kicks off, and only time will tell how he responds when game day finally arrives.